Kelly LeVeque. Thanks for being back on the show.
Honestly, it's just so nice to see you.
Same.
It's been a crazy time.
It has been a crazy time. How have you been coping?
So we had a crazy year. We had some like family things go on. My mother-in-law had an aneurysm, was in the ICU for 25 days and then in rehab. And she came home and 2 days later, quarantine happened.
Wow.
And so we had been going down to Orange County a lot, and we were quarantined in our apartment in Brentwood, which was fine for the two of us for those first 6 weeks or so. And then it was just like, we need nature. We need family. We need nature. We need to be able to have space because all the parks were closed. So Chris and I were taking Sebastian to like roundabouts in the rich neighborhoods of Brentwood, where there's like huge houses and there's like just a plot of grass in the middle, throwing down a picnic blanket and like kicking a ball around because the kid just like needed to get outside. So we actually ended up moving down to Orange County for the summer, just in Laguna. There's hikes, there's beaches. It's pretty chill. So that was really nice because we didn't, we had a nanny, we had support, and then all of a sudden it was like our son was a ping pong ball between the two of us. But I think when it comes to like taking care of our family, cooking food, like having the time to really meal plan in a way and meal prep in a way that I hadn't had the time to do with all the events that were happening in LA before quarantine. And interestingly enough, like my favorite yoga class started Zooming, my favorite HIIT training started Zooming. So it's weird to work out at home. I don't really like the connection via a screen.
Yeah.
But as you know, I'm 20 weeks pregnant.
Amazing.
So quarantine 15 really sort of happened for me. We just kind of like hunkered down, and we're trying to like celebrate baby boy number 2 and
so exciting.
Get outside as much as possible.
Well, I love any chance I get to hang with you. I relish, but especially when we get to like collaborate and create content. Because I mean, one thing about you, your followers, they love you so much.
Well, the same with yours.
I mean, yeah, I'm very grateful, but it's just like, it's so cool. Like, people message me all the time. I think there's got to be a strong overlap.
Yeah.
People that,
education.
Yeah.
We're like sharing a lot.
Education, but also like rooted in science and like pragmatism. You don't see that much of that in the wellness space.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. It needs to be livable. It needs to be flexible based on your lifestyle. And then you just keep a positive spin. Like, how can you elevate? You're not a bag of toxins that's going to end up, sick and diseased. You absolutely can be a well human being and healthy. And I think we give people the tools to do that. Or I hope, knock on wood, that
I think we
giving
do.
people the tools to do that.
Well, we do our best.
Yeah, we're trying.
Yeah. I was watching your Instagram stories the other day, and you were just dropping so much knowledge. And I think there was like something that you were saying about gluten. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, you just make so much sense, and you're not dogmatic about any of your, what you preach.
Yeah, I think sometimes people say that my recommendations are too general, and that's, I generally think people need essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, fiber-rich vegetables and leafy greens, and what they do around that should be like the best version of what they can get their hands on, but I think I like to follow the science. I'm not going to be someone who jumps on board with something and is so gung-ho and then research comes out. I need to be able to be flexible and just be a filter for the research. And even if I'm wrong or if something I've shared I'm changing my mind on, like, I want my audience to know that I'm going to be the first one to tell you, hey, like, I loved this. It was awesome. I was based on this science or this article or this study that I was referencing, and now this came out, and this is how I'm changing it up in my life. Hopefully you can use this information to the best of your ability to change your life.
So great. So how has there was like, the last time we hung out, you weren't preggers.
No, I went from being pregnant to breastfeeding to being pregnant.
So what's changed? Like, how have you been kind of like, how has your diet changed? How has maybe your supplement regimen changed? And especially under the constraints of, the pandemic and everything that, everybody's going through.
Yeah. So the beauty of, I think, the way that we both eat, it's about nutrient density. And that's so uber important when you're pregnant because you're building a human being from scratch. And when you think about the human body is 1/3 collagen, and 1/3 of collagen is glycine. And glycine all of a sudden becomes conditionally essential during pregnancy because majority of pregnant people are protein deficient. And there's so many food aversions to protein in the first trimester, especially if you have morning sickness. So for me, I ended up getting pregnant I get pregnant pretty quickly, which is a good problem to have. But I went from breastfeeding Sebastian. I weaned him on the 16th and found out I was pregnant on the 17th of April. So wow. I had no time off. And with Sebastian, I was able to spend about 3 months getting my nutrient stores up, taking a prenatal, taking a really strong DHA, really focusing, on omega-3, but specifically you're looking for like a strong source of DHA when you're pregnant. This is like brain health. You're focusing on making sure your prenatal has the right form of folate or, not folic acid, that it's folate. Really just getting my nutrient stores up, and I wasn't sick with Sebastian. I felt really vibrant even in the first trimester. And this time around I was definitely depleted. I mean, I basically had grown a human being inside of me and then fed him until he was 18 months old, given him breast milk to give him the best immunity and try my best to really nourish him, and then to get pregnant right away. My body took a hit. So I was really trying my best to focus on those nutrient dense foods. And some of my favorites are like eggs. So if you're not, for me, how was I getting my amino acids? Like I said, glycine becomes conditionally essential. You really want to have enough protein. You want all the B vitamins from pasture-raised red meat, bison, steak. And, when you don't feel like protein, you have to get a little bit creative. So for me, that was using the unbun and making grass-fed burgers. I needed a little bit of carbohydrates to not feel kind of sick and queasy about it, but I knew that this baby, and any baby really needs those B vitamins and all that iron. So that was something I leaned on. I made a whole bunch of Siete almond flour egg tacos with a bunch of avocado, which is rich in fiber and vitamin E. So you just think about what do we need as humans? All those fat soluble vitamins, all those amino acids, all those healthy fats. The baby needs that too. And if I'm not into eating fish, then I'm definitely getting pasture-raised eggs that are rich in omega-3. I'm taking my DHA to try to get those stores up. So I have my collagen smoothies. They weren't something that I was actually having first thing in the morning. I was more having them in the afternoon time, more of a lunch, because I woke up wanting more of a warm breakfast, an egg taco or something like that.
Sounds great.
But, I pretty much was sticking to how I normally eat, but just incorporating low glycemic carbohydrates. Some of them were acellular, like a tortilla or, an unbun, but I really focused on the fiber-rich, low glycemic versions because unfortunately, knowing the research and dipping into the research, elevated blood sugar for a fetus when you are a pregnant woman with elevated blood sugar not only increases their chance of childhood obesity and childhood diabetes, it increases your chance of preeclampsia, and elevated weight of the baby, which then, increases your chances of a hard labor and delivery, chances of a C-section, so it's crazy. There are so many recommendations from all over the place when it comes to pregnancy, but I really I try to focus on the positive, and I try to focus on if you were to build a human from scratch, what is that human made out of?
Yeah.
Right? And how can I, even when I'm feeling I want to vomit, how can I get these things into my diet or cover them up or sauce them with ketchup and mustard to get it down? So, and then luckily at 15 weeks, which was, not too long ago, I felt like myself again. Your energy kicks up. You want to go work out really hard. You want to eat clean. You finally are yes, give me the salmon again. So I'm thankful this time around that it's not lasting the whole time because it wasn't something I was used to.
So the first couple of weeks, you feel you've gotten the wind kicked out of you, and then you get a second wind 15 weeks in. Yeah,
but basically what happens is, and this is another reason why it's really, really important to focus, if you are thinking about getting pregnant, is to focus on nutrient density and to start supplementing early before you get pregnant, because your baby's growth is from the endometrial lining. So it's from the blood that's already in your uterus and your endometrial glands. And so basically the baby is growing based on the food and nutrition that you were consuming prior to your first trimester, which is really relieving for a lot of women who can only keep down, back in the day it might be Gatorade and saltines. In my world, this looks like Simple Mills, like plain crackers, and Element electrolyte drinks, which are, that's a phenomenal electrolyte drink that doesn't have sugar in it. I'm trying to elevate and have swaps for everything that you would need if you're like, I'm going to vomit, And that's how I coach my clients who are pregnant too. But yeah, you really, your cells are multiplying at such a fast rate. And if you don't have the nutrient stores, like specifically in research, they show that a deficiency in B6 can really increase nausea. So when you really can't keep food down, your OBGYN may actually supplement you with B6 and Unisom, which is an anti-nausea medication. I ended up just supplementing myself with B6 and making sure that my prenatal had a really high amount of it. B vitamins are water soluble, so where people worry about toxicity from fat soluble vitamins, it might look like you dropped a highlighter in your toilet, but you're getting what your body needs. And so that really helped me. It was just like staying really hydrated, using electrolytes, and taking B6. And I didn't have to take the Unisom, but there are women who literally puke all day long. And
Wow.
So getting over that is when you're no longer feeding the baby from your nutrient stores, and the placenta takes over and is able to fuel that baby. But when you think about what is that made out of, and like how much your body is stretching and growing, it's a lot. So you need certain things to hydrate your skin, and I really lean on fatty acids. Like I love omega-3s, and like I said, I love olive oil. I know you're a huge fan. Grass-fed butter. It's a time in my life where I'll have full-fat dairy. Like I'll do good culture, pasture-raised cottage cheese. Like it's kind of a plain protein, but it's also, research shows that like full-fat dairy, there was a study with women going through IVF, and full-fat dairy versus non-fat dairy, and full-fat dairy increased fertility. So, it's kind of one of those things, nutrition science, where you look at that and you go, well, was it because they were getting more fat and so they were absorbing more fat-soluble vitamins and they were getting more protein? Is it really the fat piece, or is it the dairy piece? I don't know. There are women who have zero dairy throughout their pregnancy, but it was funny this time around. I posted a picture of sort of what I call a quote-unquote health plate. I was like, chopped veggies, some sauerkraut, a cottage cheese, some protein. I think it was like chicken. I was basically making lettuce wraps, and I was like, any guesses? And I had all these comments, girls being like, oh my God, is that what I think it is? Because they know that was one of my number one cravings when I was pregnant with Sebastian.
Interesting.
So, but pregnancy's a wild ride, and everybody's different, but I think sometimes the recommendations are all over the place, and I think there is definitely some confusion around what your body needs.
Yeah, one thing that shocked me, I didn't realize the surge in energy, just raw energy requirements that you get when you're breastfeeding. Don't you I'm not an expert in this topic. Don't you need to increase your calorie intake by 1,000 or something if you're breastfeeding?
It totally depends on the weight you've gained throughout your pregnancy.
Huh.
So I did have to increase a lot with Sebastian. So I gained 26 pounds when I was pregnant with Sebastian. And people gain anywhere between 20 and 90 pounds when they're pregnant. And so when you think about when that pregnancy weight goes away, then you really are relying on your food, or you're becoming nutrient deficient and you're basically giving up your own stores for your child.
Wow.
So, but there are some really cool things, like the Milk Lab in Santa Monica is something I use. So instead of breastfeeding Bash, I pumped, and then I sent my milk to the lab, and they were able to tell me. And surprisingly, like, I eat a lot of protein, probably like somewhere like 0.75 grams per pound of body mass on average, like somewhere around 100 grams of protein a day. And when I was breastfeeding Sebastian, I was actually back to my pre-pregnancy weight about 3.5 weeks after I gave birth, which was fast. But also, all of a sudden, my breast milk was deficient in protein. It was low in calories. So it was, on average, an ounce of breast milk should be 20 calories per ounce, and mine was 15, and it came back that I was like low in specific amino acids. So that's a kind of like cool technology that I like to use, because, when people are like, oh, I'm just gonna eat more calories, it's like, it's just not about that. Like, you need to know what you need. And so right away I was like, oh God, like, I need to start making more meatballs that I can just pop in the middle of the day. I need to double up on the protein in my smoothie, or I need to like add hard-boiled eggs.
Wow.
And so, when you're breastfeeding a brand new baby, you're kind of just feel like a cow. You barely have time to like, in the beginning, to like shower for yourself and like feed yourself. But that became something that became really important to me, because when you think about the growth of your child, what is coming through your breast milk, or, if people aren't breastfeeding, what's in the formula is literally making up the cells in their body. It's creating healthy little brains. I mean, there's B vitamins, for example, like B12 and iron. I mean, that can create significant changes in your child's brain, their IQ, their cognitive ability. I mean, reaction time, like, we know this from the science. And so to learn that, like, my breast milk is a little deficient in protein, I was like, give me all the red meat, where I think other women would be like, oh, my baby's not putting on a lot of weight, or I've lost my baby weight and I'm not producing enough milk. Like, what do I need? And I think it's like, let's get into the science. If there is, and it's not a really expensive test. Like, it's less than $100. And I knew right there, like, oh, that's, once you're, back to your pre-pregnancy weight, it's a good thing to figure out, because you really start to learn, like, okay, where can I really up my macros, or where can I kind of dial in my diet in a very specific way. So I don't know. I'm geeking out on all the pregnancy stuff this time around, because I'm going to launch a actual nutrition course online for pregnancy, just because I think that just like some of the articles I read even today on some of the best websites are mentioning things like folic acid, and you're like, what? Folic acid? Close to half of pregnant women have an MTHFR mutation, and they're not able to use that for synthetic form of folate. So what are we doing? But I don't know.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I'll often see folic acid used as if it were the same thing as folate. Like, I'll read articles about how there's, you need to eat your spinach because there's folic acid in it. And I'm like, there's not folic acid in spinach. Folic acid is, there's folate in spinach.
Yeah, and that's a great way, actually. I love little things like that to remind people, like, what is spinach? It's foliage. There's folate in it. And so I always say, like, if it's foliage, like, you're getting folate. And I think that's it. Those little reminders just to add if you're pregnant, like, oh, how can I add some leafy greens? Or if I can't have salmon, how can I get some omega-3, even if it's a pasture-raised egg? And, just other ways to do it. But there's a lot of confusion. You get on the internet and they're like, oh, just have a bunch of flax and you'll get your omega-3s. And I'm like, your child's brain is depending on the long chain omega-3s that you're ingesting, and those are short chain, and your conversion rate is less than 5%. So let's get serious about, like, apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Yeah.
If you have somebody, well, what's your take on then, like, the plant, people who are plant-based? Because you have clients, I'm sure some of them are on plant-based diets. So, like, what's your take on that diet in the context of pregnancy?
You're trying to break the internet. Just kidding. So here's my take. Body Love, my first book, came out, and I was talking about the Fab Four, and I talked a lot about the proteins that I personally eat and I choose to eat that I think are nutrient dense. What I received and criticism that I received on that first book was that I was not including the plant-based community, that the only thing that they could take from that book was the Fab Four smoothie, and that they could use that formula and use their plant-based proteins. So in my second book, Body Love Every Day, I have a chapter on the plant-based devotee. I talk about what it means to be plant-based, and it takes more work, in my opinion, to get the nutrient density that you need, to make sure that things are not blocked. The absorption of certain nutrients aren't blocked by phytates and things like that, oxalates. And I explain that you need to sprout and soak, and you need to supplement, and you should be on a B vitamin, and you absolutely should be on an algae-based DHA, and let's be just responsible about it. And so I think this is what's happening in my, when I'm thinking about my pregnancy course, is if someone emails me and says, hey, I'm vegan or vegetarian, is this course for me? I'm going to be totally transparent. This course is going to talk about the most nutrient, most bioavailable sources of B vitamins, DHA, folate, magnesium, iron. And unfortunately, those sources are not the most bioavailable, nutrient-dense sources, plant-based sources. And I am looking to help women make sure not only are they just at, meeting the requirements, that they're giving their child the most optimal start. And so for me, pregnancy, I'm not in a place. I mean, maybe there will be a second course that includes everybody, but this is definitely going to be, for meat eaters.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you're unapologetic about it too, because I find that, there's like this, I think there's pressure on women. I could be wrong. I'm a guy.
Yeah.
But what I kind of see, 70% of my followers on Instagram are women, and what I think I've observed is that there's like a pressure on them from the plant-based community to adopt it, because women tend to be more empathetic than men, so the zealots in that community tend to appeal to empathy, and to emotion, and then there's this idea that meat is somehow like not sexy, or it's not cute, it's not as feminine as like a salad. We see all this clip art, or not clip art, but like stock imagery of women like always laughing over a salad, right?
Right, totally.
It's just super common. So I really appreciate that you just like own, your dietary philosophy, and you're not apologetic about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's crazy is I think when I think about the first trimester, I was obviously open to eating eggs because I didn't have to cook raw meat, and I was open to eating cottage cheese because I just got to open a container. But I was adamant that I was going to get grass-fed beef at least a couple times a week throughout my first trimester, even if like I said, I was saucing it up and wrapping it in an unbun or something like that, because I just know the nutrient levels that I'm getting from that. And it is really hard. It's one of the biggest hurdles I have when working with clients, because for a number of reasons, like you have the emotional side of it, that it's an animal, right? And that's one thing. And then you have this other side of it, which is that there are old fitness models who are now have fitness Instagrams, and they talk about what they eat, and maybe they've been plant-based, and they have amazing bodies. And that is, all of a sudden, people want to start their day with a green juice and then have a bowl of fruit, and then come around to having a salad with beans and nuts on it for lunch, and then they're having a plant-based pizza with like a flax crust. And that woman is gorgeous and with a great body, and they want that, and they think that that's the way to get it. But it's hard, because if you look back, that person was already a model, already a fitness model. It was very much, they may be white knuckling it through hunger, and you just don't know the other side of it. You don't know, like, how are they feeling emotionally, and what is their past. And so I think it's hard when women struggle with weight, because they're reaching for answers, and meat feels like, oh, you're going to have a steak, you're going to have a beer belly, or you're going to gain weight. And actually, I just see it the opposite way. When I get people eating red meat, I've had people who've lost their period and, have it come back. We're talking about nutrient stores, and we're talking about iron, and we're talking about really bioavailable nutrients that can really heal the body, in my opinion. And, red meat isn't for everybody. That's the reality of it. It's not for everybody, but I think there is a case for regenerative farming, for increased soil health, so soil regeneration, carbon neutral and carbon negative farming. It's definitely going to be the way that we heal our soil, and it's not going to happen through tilling like mass like corn, soy, and wheat products. The soil is destroyed. It's GMO everything. It's sprayed with pesticides. It's, from brain health, like that is not the way to a healthy brain. So I get nervous. Like if people want to be plant-based, I empower my clients to be plant-based, but we're doing it from the most nutrient-dense traditional ways like soaking and sprouting. We're focusing on plants. It's not an excuse to go eat a bunch of processed carbohydrates. And you have to supplement and be responsible.
Yeah. Man, I love your brain. Speaking of supplementation, I know that you're a big fan of collagen. You mentioned it already, that the body is a third collagen. Yeah. Tell me about collagen.
Well, yeah, so you and I both know that the glycine and methionine balance in the body is really important, and there were some studies where people showed lifespan is shortened when there's a really methionine-rich diet, but when you actually have a balance between methionine and glycine, those statistics are null and void. And so when we think about it, what does that mean? That just means that people need to eat nose to tail. They need to include things like bone broth, collagen-rich sources of foods, organ meats, things like that, and none of that is what we're finding at the grocery store. You go to the grocery store and you see chicken cutlets and you're like, well, is that my like gel bra from my 20s or is that like food?
Funny.
It's like, it's everything. Nothing has a bone on it anymore. Nothing has skin. And it's funny. I mean, we both know Anya from Bel Campo, and since we moved, I've been ordering boxes from her down and they deliver frozen. And sometimes even Chris gets the heebie-jeebies. He's like, why is there so much blood in this? And I'm like, because it was an animal. Like, you just don't normally see it. I prepare it for you.
Yeah.
There it is. But collagen is just, in my opinion, like I told you, glycine becomes conditionally essential when you're pregnant. But I just want to make sure that my methionine and glycine balance is there. And I also, specifically want to make sure that I'm getting enough of those types of collagen amino acids like proline and glycine just to not only build my baby's organs and those tissues that are made up of collagen, and that there is enough of those amino acids to really synthesize that collagen and not be deficient. I think it's a great way to round out your amino acid profile. It's like so many times I'll make my smoothie with collagen and I'll get a bunch of DMs like it's not a complete protein. But in my world, I'm eating grass-fed beef, I'm having salmon, I'm having eggs. I'm eating a lot of complete proteins in my diet. So, I think if someone is plant-based, they need to look for complete sources of protein or, make sure that whether that's like a pea and pumpkin seed protein powder and it's funny though, because even some of my plant-based people will add marine collagen.
Interesting.
Because it has this, it just, when you think about collagen, what does a woman think about? She thinks about like plump, youthful skin.
Yeah.
She thinks about the collagen in her face and how when people yo-yo diet and lose weight, they lose collagen and they're breaking down that tissue. And our synthesis of collagen depletes as we age. So I don't know. I just think, like I said earlier, like I'm about nutrient density. I'm about making sure my body has everything it needs so that it's not breaking me down to do something and so that this little baby inside of me has everything that he needs to.
Yeah, I love it. I take Vital Proteins collagen almost every day. Probably not every day, but definitely a couple times a week. I'll mix it into like soups. I will throw it into smoothies. I make sometimes like these paleo pancakes.
I saw your pancakes.
Yeah, they're fire.
I was like, Max.
They're so good. But you brought up a really important point, and I think there's a lot of confusion about, collagen as a protein source. It shouldn't count, right, towards your protein goals. No,
I think when you think about when I was mentioning that I'm like looking to get, somewhere around 100 grams of protein a day, that's one thing that I think is also interesting too, is that I'll have clients that use collagen in their smoothie in the morning and then they're like, I'm hungry. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you try actually like using a complete, like a grass-fed beef protein and throwing collagen in your coffee or your tea later in the day, or like you said, a soup, and really using it to like I said, round out your amino acid profile. But yeah, you just, again, like even people who are focusing on protein and getting enough grams per pound of body mass, which, you know, I don't really like to prescribe people like calories or macros or whatever, but I think having a general idea of like, well, what does 6 ounces of steak get me? Or what does 3 eggs get me? It's really important because you think about muscle mass, what is it? It's your metabolism. Like, it literally is what balances blood sugar, because if you have insulin hungry muscles and you have space and you suck it up, and you're good to go. And like, you're aging, as we age and our sex hormones deplete and our muscles kind of take the hit, sarcopenia happens. And then what? Like, we're not able to really deal with blood sugar issues as well. And kind of like, think about when I age, like, I want to be able to like do yoga and walk down the stairs to the beach and hike with my kids. And I just want to be functional, you know, physically and mentally. So protein is so important, but collagen is a phenomenal way to round out that amino acid profile.
Couldn't agree more. Protein is crucially important. Yeah, like I've intuitively always prioritized protein at every meal. Like, just make it this, you know, put it on center stage, you know, like make that the primary thing on the plate, in my view, and then, you know, like round it out with the roasted, you know, maybe the root vegetables, seasonal stuff, you know, salads and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the most satisfying as well. Like we know, even just looking at research in regards to obsessive thoughts about food and hunger hormones and naturally eating less over the day, it's like study after study after study says if we're starting our day with protein, that you balance your blood sugar better, you have less obsessive thoughts about eating, less late night eating, naturally eat less, naturally feel more satisfied. And so that's one of the first things I look at with a client is it's like, oh, you're starting your day with, and I don't want to say that oatmeal's this horrible thing for you, but if you're starting your day with carbohydrates and are going to spike your blood sugar and crash down 3 hours later, and then you're just going to white knuckle it to lunch when you can have a quote unquote salad with probably not enough protein, then that's anxiety. That creates so much anxiety for me and for my clients too. So it's one of the first places I look is like, let's look at your breakfast and are you getting a source of protein?
Yeah, so well said. That when you eat if you undereat protein, you're going to eat more carbs and carbs and fat do nothing to maintain your muscle mass.
No.
You need the protein.
Absolutely.
Carbs can support your energy levels. They can support, you know, vigorous exercise, which everybody should be doing, right? And if you're not doing it, well, you need less carbs. You know, you should be eating less. You should be eating fewer carbs. But it's really the protein, I think, you know, and when we're talking about protein in the context of whole foods, which are the most nutrient dense, as you so eloquently stated, you know, it really is the MVP of the plate.
It is. And unfortunately, it gets such a bad reputation. And, you know, we just have to kind of beat our own drum and continue to share the science, because what I worry about is when I sit down with clients and they're like, yeah, but if I ordered that out, or isn't that bad? And it's really sad. Yeah.
When it comes to carbs, earlier in the show, you dropped a very interesting word. You were referring to some of your carb choices during pregnancy as being acellular.
Yeah.
And I don't want to interrupt you because you're in such a beautiful flow. But like, so
I was on a rant.
Yeah. So when it comes to carb choices through this, because carbs are not bad. Carbs are definitely not bad. You know, you might argue that they're misused today. But what are you looking for, and what is the difference between acellular and cellular?
Yeah, so when we look at carbohydrates, you have cellular carbohydrates and acellular carbohydrates. And cellular carbohydrates mean that the carbohydrates or the glucose present or the sugar present in that food is wrapped in a cell, a fiber cell. So what I always tell my clients is it's the whole food. Like rice is a cellular carbohydrate. Rice flour crackers is an acellular carbohydrate. It has been refined out of its fiber cell, and that, carbohydrate, whether that's starch or sugar, is really present and can be digested very quickly and end up in your bloodstream, spiking your blood sugar higher, creating a larger insulin spike, and causing you to crash harder. So what is fiber? Well, fiber, I think nature does like such a beautiful job of really helping us to support our blood sugar balance. So what are some great acellular carbohydrates? The fiber-rich foods, like all your fiber-rich non-starchy vegetables, all of your fiber-rich berries and fruits like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and then even looking at the starchy tubers, they are cellular, but their starch is wrapped up, and if it's like sweet potatoes, also their sugar is wrapped up in a fiber cell. So not only do you have to chew, mastication, right? Chew your food, then it has to hit your stomach for hydrochloric acid, then it hits your large intestines and your small intestines and your large intestines, and you're getting all the pancreatic enzymes and you're getting all the fermentation from those microbes. It isn't this flour-based substance that you barely have to chew, that's completely dissolved into, what's going to end up in your small intestines, hit all of those microbes, overfeed them, pass through your intestinal barrier so quickly, spike your blood sugar. It's a totally different experience. That's why, even just getting people away from, hey, let's not do all of these acellular foods and let's lean on squashes and sweet potatoes and berries and things that are keeping you from riding this blood sugar roller coaster. Even if there are a lot of carbohydrates present, they're not going to have the impact in your body. And so, I don't know. I think that's the way we were meant to eat. And when you think about the industrialization, refining of grains and sugar and all of these things, it's like you can't even chew it that small. You're not digesting it that small, and you're really just allowing your body to have to deal with that. And so I do prioritize cellular carbohydrates over acellular carbohydrates, and I talk about that in my second book, and I talk about it with my clients. If there's an opportunity and you're like, ooh, I really want this, I don't know, these crackers. Well, if you're at a grocery store and there's roasted sweet potatoes, can you get those instead? Just really looking to elevate. However, caveat, I talked about having acellular carbohydrates in my first trimester. There are acellular carbohydrates that are low net carb, probably grain-free, using high fiber products like psyllium husk and almond flour and things like that, where they're infusing things with flax or chia. And they're not going to have the effect, as strong of an effect as a piece of bread on your blood sugar. So when you're feeling nauseous, when you're not feeling great, when you're pregnant, or you just want to have a little bit more fun, I think that today in 2020, we have so many options to really amazing products that can make you feel like, or your spouse or your date or your kid feel like, oh, they're getting to have a little fun and leading quote unquote normal life. You want to make normal protein and vegetables, and then you want to be able to not create food rules for your kids, and you want to be able to have things like that. And so I'm really thankful for certain brands coming out with high quality, limited ingredient, low glycemic, high fiber options for when you're how do I get through this burger before, I don't know.
What is Kelly LeVeque's, speaking of products and brands and acellular carbs, what is Kelly LeVeque's guilty pleasure these days, food-wise? Right
now, this is bad that you're asking me this, because right now there's this little beachy shack that's on one of our walks, and there is a local person that makes vegan chocolate chip cookie ice cream sandwiches with coconut milk ice cream. And I got them for Chris's birthday, and I'm I can't even go by that place. They're so good. I'm intentional. I'm going to be honest. I'm really intentional. One, because I do know the science of blood sugar for this little baby, and I know how it's going to affect his life. I also know how it may impact our labor and delivery, and I just want to be the healthiest I can be. So I try not to keep that stuff around, and when I do, it's no sugar, super dark chocolate, eating evolved, almond butter cups. I'm leaning on those kinds of foods or products that I can kind of keep around if I need a sweet bite, so that I don't end up kind of going crazy. And there are times when food is around and someone's like, it's gluten-free, dairy-free, blah, 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 blah. And you get like roped in. You're like, okay, I'm going to try it. And you're like, whoa, there's no off button for this. Like, I can't keep this stuff around. And I think being honest with yourself, especially because in the first trimester, you can create so many bad habits based on the fact that you really don't feel like eating certain things, that things can become normal. And then the problem with that is, I'm halfway, and what happens is when we test the microbiomes of pregnant women in the end, in their third trimester, their microbiome looks like someone with prediabetes. So, and the chances of gestational diabetes go up based on the flux in hormones in your body and the change in the microbes in your microbiome. And so, it's interesting. I kind of have thought about the research that's come out in this. Like, is it because we feel like junk and so we eat junk? And then we completely change, the ecosystem of our microbiome? Or is it really because pregnancy causes such a shift in these hormones that it's, changing the microbiome? But you pass your microbiome to your child. Microbes are actually... they migrate. It's just so crazy. They migrate, and they are literally like throughout your whole vaginal canal. Your baby comes through that. If they're vaginally birthed, they're getting like doused in microbes. It's their first, interaction. There are microbes in the third trimester that like are in your uterus, and so they migrate up, and then also you're birthing a baby through that, and then colostrum is the first few days of breastfeeding, and that is just. I'm sure you've taken colostrum. That became really popular for a while. It's just a phenomenal source of probiotic bacteria. So to think about passing that on and affecting not only my child's microbiome and how those microbes interact with their immune system, and it can be really overwhelming to think about the responsibility you have as a pregnant woman if you really understand the research and the science. But I try to keep it positive and not be really hard on myself. So I really, like at the halfway mark, I really reevaluate, and I do it with my clients. When the minute they stop feeling nauseous, we reevaluate, like, what is your body, what's going on in your body? How much weight have you gained? We want a healthy amount of weight throughout the whole pregnancy. We want to make sure, because at the end of your pregnancy, like I said, chances of gestational diabetes go up, changes in your microbiome happen, weight gain happens faster. And so we really want to start to look at, well, what are we eating? How much sugar are we allowing? And how many acellular carbohydrates and processed foods are we allowing to kind of like accidentally float into the second half of our pregnancy in this time when we can gain weight pretty quickly. So we just reevaluate and we check in. And the most of the time, before someone goes to get their glucose test, I have my pregnant women use a glucometer and start testing their fasting blood sugar when they wake up in the morning and checking in with those like meals that have become habits. Like maybe they started getting tacos from someplace or pizza from someplace. Like, what does your blood sugar look like after you eat that now in 20 weeks of 20 weeks pregnant or 25 weeks pregnant, an hour, 2 hours after your meal? And is it putting you in a place of like prediabetes or gestational diabetes numbers? We may need to switch some things around. Can you get cauliflower crust pizzas and put them in your freezer and start making your own pizza instead? Or can you get those flavors by making, some other kind of dish? And so it isn't that anyone is ever dieting in pregnancy. It's always about nutrient density, but the bad habits start early when you don't feel good. And it's important to reevaluate that, because when you think about being pregnant for 10 months, most women, it's not 9, it's closer to 10.
Interesting.
And it's almost a full year, Max. Like,
Wow.
Think about that. Like, everyone, using it as an excuse to be like, I'm pregnant and I've been restrictive for 5 or 10 years with my diet. Now I'm going to go hog wild. You just have to really think about the baby and how that's affecting their future and their child's future, and on and on and on. And then you really need to just have some checkpoints with yourself. It's not rocket science, but it is all about nutrient density. It's about seeing if you have any bad habits that you've sort of picked up, and just trying your best.
I love that. Man, I have so much respect for women going through that 10 months.
It's
Damn.
crazy. Yeah, and what's crazy is like when you don't feel good, weight gain changes. Like with Sebastian, I felt great. So, I was eating pretty lean and moderate to low carbohydrate, which is also a total myth. When you look at some of the recommendations, that 175 grams of carbohydrates is what a woman should be eating in a day. Pre-pregnancy, I was somewhere between 50 and 75.
Those are the recommendations, 175?
175.
Wow.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot, especially if these women aren't like CrossFitters.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you're sedentary,
yeah, think
why
about
do you need to eat
that.
175 grams of carbs a day?
And so many women are diagnosed with gestational diabetes.
Wow.
And that's really dangerous. So it happens to a lot of women, but I just don't think there's education in like what turns to blood sugar, and is 175 grams of carbohydrates truly necessary? So I have more than what I had before pregnancy. Before pregnancy, like I said, I vacillate somewhere between like 50, 75 really hard workouts. There may be a day where I'm hitting 100, but that's my carb tolerance is not at 100. Like, I know my blood sugar. I test it with a glucometer just to kind of check in with myself when I need that motivation. And I do the best and feel the best mentally somewhere between around 50 or 50 to 75. When I get pregnant, that's like, okay, I'm at 100, or maybe I'm at 100, maybe I'm at like 105 or 110, but like 175 grams of carbohydrates a day is a ticket to gestational diabetes.
I also think that like recommendations, recommendations to meet certain macros, especially non-essential macros like carbohydrates, don't make any sense, because you've probably got some women running around who are like, oh man, I've only hit 75 grams of carbohydrates today. I've got to eat 100 more carbohydrates or my baby is going to,
Right.
And so they're like trying to make up for those macros.
Right.
It's just sounds
And it
crazy.
should be opposite. It should be macro goals to hit would be nutrient-dense protein macros, getting the essential fatty acids like your DHA and EPA, and getting people excited about whether it's like healthy fats like avocados or leafy greens. And that's another thing. Like I said, first trimester, you might not be eating a lot of veggies. Veggies sound disgusting. People don't want to eat them. But then all of a sudden you got to check in and be like, I should probably sit down and try a salad. It's like when you start to eat those things again, then you crave them again. And just reminding my clients that like, hey, I totally get that you didn't want to touch a vegetable or get within 10 feet of it in the first 12 or 14 weeks of your pregnancy. But like, how can we try to just see, like, let's order one. Let's make one. Let's see how we feel. Because and I know that when people start to eat that way, that's the stuff that they crave. And so we want to like I said, check in and reevaluate and make sure that we're craving the foods that our body needs and our baby needs.
Is that a thing? You don't want vegetables the first? That's
Yeah.
crazy. That to me is another indicator that meat and eggs and things like that really are what.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's insane.
Yeah. And then like when you think about all of, I love your Instagram, and I always have, because I think you do a good job of talking about nutrients, because people, like I said, aren't comparing apples to apples. They're comparing apples to oranges. So they'll be like iron and kale versus steak. Well, we're talking about non-heme iron versus heme iron, and we're talking about what is the absorption of those two foods. The bioavailability of the iron in those foods are so drastically different. It's 4 times as much in steak as it is in kale, based on, the type of anti-nutrients that are holding on to that iron and our ability to actually use that iron. And so when you think about that, and then on top of that, how much a pound of kale versus a pound of steak looks like it's confusing, because people are not comparing it correctly. And then and that's why, like I said, I don't feel right coming out with like a vegetarian pregnancy course, because I know what it's like to feel great through pregnancy. I know what it's like to feel like, get the veggies away from me. How do I get some nutrients? And, at least I know if I'm eating pasture-raised, beef, I know I'm eating liquid sunshine. They did enough of the grazing on the foliage for me, and I'm going to get all of that goodness.
I love that. We're almost out of time. I just one last thing that I want to know. Are you restricting the timing around your feeding windows at all, or is that not something that you're thinking about during pregnancy?
So you think about all the things that you think that you used to use before you were pregnant, whether that's like HIIT training, intermittent fasting, all saunas. Like there are things that I really miss. Like I have an infrared sauna in my house and I can't use it. But intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating is so powerful for controlling blood sugar. But when I wake up pregnant, I'm hungry. And so it's something where when I wasn't pregnant, I'd wake up and have a little coffee, do a little work, get a workout in, hang with Bash, a lot of trains, a lot of trucks. And then all of a sudden it'd be 9 and I'd be like, oh, I'll make a smoothie or some eggs. And now it's like he's up at the crack of dawn, 5:45, 6:15, and I'm making him breakfast. He's eating at 6:30 or 7, and so am I. And where I'm being cognizant is I don't like to go more than 12 hours. I think that is the gateway to intermittent fasting is if we could all just eat within 12 hours and not eat, the following 12 hours, we'd all be in a way better place. We probably wouldn't need as much intermittent fasting, but people eat beyond 12 hours all the time. So for me, I do kind of keep an eye on not eating super late. Luckily, also pregnancy, you are pretty exhausted, at least in the beginning. And my bedtime is somewhere between 9 and 10 right now. It used to be maybe between 10 and 11 when I wasn't pregnant. So I like to have a couple hours of like not having food before I go to bed. And so I'm somewhere between 7 and 7, whereas before I was maybe like 9 to 6, 9 to 7, 10 to 7, naturally, just easily. And that's kind of how I approach intermittent fasting most of the time is it should feel easy and not really hard, because when it's hard, then you think about food. And then I see clients binge on the back end. Like their feeding window is only 6 hours. I got to get as much in as I can.
Yeah.
And they end up eating late. And I just don't like that. I'd rather have people eat like my grandma. Let's be done at 5 or 6 or 7 latest. So
I love that. Eating late, no bueno.
Mm-mm.
And 12 hours, I think that's something anybody can do.
Yeah. And it's not like a hard and fast rule. There are women who are hungry around the clock pregnant. I am lucky that I am not that person. People wake up pregnant, have to pee 5 times a night. One of those times they wake up and they feel starving. They go to their kitchen, pound some nut butter, pound some crackers, whatever they're doing. And I think that that's unfortunate, like to feel that way, to feel those. And I don't know if it's like hypoglycemic moments or, just a lack of energy or whatever it is, because it can be exhausting. So everyone's pregnancy is different. And I'm just speaking from personal experience, and from when it comes to my recommendations, it's just from the research that's available.
Yeah, love that. I want to thank Vital Proteins for sponsoring this episode of the show. As I mentioned, I use their products pretty regularly.
So do I.
You do?
Yeah.
Nice.
I was joking with one of the girls that works there, Christina, because the Beauty Greens is like a super green collagen, and I finally felt like veggies again, and really having a lot of greens. And so I was making the greenest smoothies with the Beauty Greens collagen. I was like, I need to get my hands on more of this stuff. It's just delicious. So that's
dope. Awesome. Where can the last question that gets asked to everybody on the show is coming up, but before we get to that, where can my listeners find you on the internet? And what was the name of your most recent book, if they want to pick that up, which they should?
So I'm on social everywhere at Be Well by Kelly, and my book series is Body Love and Body Love Every Day. So great. You're just the best. Max is like, I feel exactly the same way. We are, I would say, soul sisters, but I'll take it. Okay. I'll take it. What does it mean to you to live a genius life, Kelly Levesque? I think being pregnant this time around, I think to live a genius life is to constantly evaluate your life and to edit. I think a lot of times we, like I kind of alluded to earlier, we can get caught up in things and feel maybe that one way of life we've committed to, we've preached about, we've talked about with our friends and our family, and we feel compressed to constantly stay in that, whether it feels aligned, we feel aligned to that or not. And I think having the flexibility to constantly grow and change and evolve is really, really important. I think now more than ever in 2020, we're learning that time and time and time again. Like, socially, politically, nutritionally. It's really all about being open to learning and being open to changing. And to me, if something doesn't feel right in your life and it isn't vibing with you, like, lean in, do the research, educate yourself, and grow.
Couldn't have said it better. I love that. So true, so important. Thank you again for being here.
My
To
pleasure.
all you guys out there in podcast land, I value your time and attention. Share this episode of the show. There was so much important stuff that Kelly dropped. I mean, there's no limit to her wisdom. Text me. Let me know what you thought about the show. 310-299-9401. And I'll catch you on the next episode.
Just giving your phone number away.
Just giving my phone number out. That's what we do.
I love you, Max.
I love you too. Peace, guys.